Nintendo's first-party output on this thing was unprecedented. One of, if not the best lineups they've ever had. Pretty much every single one of their core franchises got an entry on GameCube, and they introduced loads of new ones as well. But every Nintendo console is defined by the mainline Mario title that releases on it. And nearly a year after launch, the GameCube got Super Mario Sunshine. Well, move that down a peg. After what many critics referred to as Luigi's barn at launch, we finally got a traditional Mario game that next year. De-emphasized traditional. Sunshine followed a lot of Super Mario 64's framework, but changed a ton, truly making this feel like one of the most different Mario games out there. You have a water pack, Flood. You can spray water, hover with it. It's a fun and helpful addition, though Mario's raw controls barely need the help, as this is one of the tightest controlling Mario games. Mario 64 feels sluggish in comparison to how quick and nimble Mario is in Sunshine, and the stages are wonderfully designed, and it's an immensely memorable game. People fucking hate it. This is one of the most polarizing Mario titles. The difficulty can be pretty harsh sometimes, and going for 100% completion is grueling. It's not required, you don't get anything special for it, but elements of Sunshine definitely feel quite rushed. Lots of content was cut prior to release to get the game out in time, and while the title doesn't feel incomplete, it obviously is very conservative with the content that's there. They'll squeeze everything they can out of a level to make sure you play through it again and again, and coupled with the unbalanced difficulty at times, and Sunshine can be quite frustrating, but I still love it. While Mario Sunshine is a very peculiar Mario game, it's still a Mario game. The only Mario on the GameCube, take it. And weirdly enough, out of all franchises to get multiple entries on the platform, it wasn't Mario, it was Metroid. Holiday 2002, Metroid Prime hit store shelves. One day before Metroid Fusion released on the Game Boy Advance, after 8 years of no Metroid game, finally in 2002, fans could say, "God, stop with the Metroid games!" Prime was not only the first 3D entry in the series, but it was first person as well, a move that confused and worried many, but ended up making for one of the greatest games of all time. Metroid Prime was developed by newcomer Retro Studios and came out brilliantly. At the time, Metroid was at its height, so a few years later, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes followed. Wait, it did? Echoes is barely talked about in comparison to the original and sold about half as much, so it still got rave reviews. I think Prime did so well because it was an entirely new thing. Everybody had to check it out. But then by the time Prime 2 released, I think that excitement wore down a bit. I don't know. Nintendo pretty much positioned Metroid as a competitor towards Halo. Prime 2 featured a multiplayer mode, but Halo 2 featured online and launched the same week. Oh, these numbers make a lot more sense. Oh. Still great games, more Metroid than I think anybody ever expected on this console, which I can say the same about Zelda. My there was so much Zelda content here, and it all started in 2003 with The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker. Okay, people weren't too thrilled with this art direction. When the GameCube tech demo looked like this, and soon after this was the Zelda game Nintendo showed, people weren't happy. They wanted Ocarina of Time with better graphics, and what Nintendo gave us was better than that. Everybody was pissed. Let's be honest, Wind Waker looks a million times better than that tech demo anyways, but people wanted a gritty, realistic Zelda. This was when Lord of the Rings was huge, so I think people really wanted a Zelda game that gave off the vibes of those flicks, and instead we got a pain chart. I mean, disregarding the graphics, Wind Waker is a great Zelda game. It's one of the most gripping titles in the whole series due to how lively and fun everything feels, but it's never afraid to be a downer or more serious at times. And while the cartoony visuals were lamented at the time, have you seen this game recently? Like, this looks better than some games look right now. If the game came out today, nobody would think twice about it. The toon style helped to make this game so damn everlasting. It will never look bad or outdated. And while many detested the style back in the day, it's the most frequently used Zelda art style. Numerous games use Toon Link, and I do feel like it's one of the most true to Zelda art styles out there. I've always felt Zelda's supposed to be colorful and lively, but the beautiful thing about it is, it's a legend. Each game is supposed to be a different story passed down generation to generation, and the differing art styles represent that. How each storyteller puts their own unique spin on things. So who the hell told this story? Just 1 year later, in 2004, The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures released, still using the Toon Link character design. Oh great, now there's 4 of them? 4 Swords Adventures was the sequel to the bonus sub-game included in the Game Boy Advance port of A Link to the Past. Why did nobody care? Multiplayer top-down Zelda, and the only way to do it is to plug in one of these. Why did nobody care? This was the biggest push by Nintendo for the Game Boy Advance to GameCube road trip yet. You can play Four Swords Adventure single player, but that's sad. To play multiplayer, everybody needs a Game Boy Advance with a GBA to GameCube link cable to play, because certain things appear on the TV, certain things appear on the GBA. Now, is this really necessary? No. They could have easily designed this game to work just fine on one screen, but the GBA does allow for each player to go off and do their own thing. It's a fun multiplayer romp, but obviously one of the weakest Zeldas single player wise. I'll give Nintendo this, it takes a lot of guts to make a Zelda game based around owning 4 Game Boy Advances, 4 link cables, and 1 GameCube. Stupid, it's also stupid. Most of the time, linking your Game Boy Advance to the GameCube and specific titles unlocked extra goodies if you had the right game. Linking Metroid Fusion to Prime unlocked a special suit in the original Metroid for NES. Wind Waker, you could use the Tingle Tuner with the GBA link cable. Mom, the Tingle Tuner! Regardless of Four Swords Adventures being good, it still wasn't the Zelda fans wanted. That came at the very end of the GameCube's life. Announced in 2004 and finally releasing in holiday 2006, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Nintendo listened. This was the Zelda people wanted. Something darker, more epic, and it was, again, a phenomenal game, though it doesn't hold up as well as Wind Waker does graphically. I mean, it all comes down to art style. Twilight Princess on GameCube still looks good. I mean, it honestly looks like an early Xbox 360 game, and the low resolution masks a lot of flaws. But come on, this just looks better. Gameplay-wise, comparing Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, I really think it completely comes down to preference. I don't think one is obviously better than the other. I'd say Twilight Princess is a more consistently good game with more to it. The original version of Wind Waker does have some glaring issues in the back end of the game. The infamous Triforce quest goes on for far too long, but Wind Waker is inherently more charming and memorable in my opinion. If anything, I think it's incredible we got these two games on the GameCube at all, and they were as good as they were. Twilight Princess was the last game Nintendo released on the GameCube, and they basically did it out of obligation because by the time it released, their next console had already launched, with Twilight Princess on it. The game got delayed so many times, Nintendo decided to release it on Wii first, and then follow that up with a version on GameCube. But since this is the original version, the original vision of the game, I think this still feels the best. Twilight Princess on Wii forces motion controls onto the player, which aren't horrible, but the game wasn't designed around them. Aiming your bow or slingshot is perfection with the pointer, but everything else is a bit more tacked on. It definitely feels most at home on GameCube, which ironically is where the least people played it. But its release cemented the GameCube as the ultimate Zelda machine at the time, especially taking the bonus discs into consideration. For pre-ordering Wind Waker, you'd get this special version of Ocarina of Time from Nintendo 64 on a GameCube disc, including a few demos and the never-before-released Master Quest edition of Ocarina of Time. And then just because they could, they released Ocarina of Time on GameCube again, just in case you blinked the first time. The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition. This came bundled with GameCube consoles for a period of time, mainly because they wouldn't sell. So Nintendo farted some Zelda games on a disc and called it a day. This disc includes Zelda 1 and 2 for NES and Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask for N64, plus some little bonuses like a Wind Waker demo and a short video retrospective of the Zelda series, sort of pointing out how you can play every Zelda game released up to that point on GameCube. All the games playable on that disc, the Game Boy games, plus a link to the past on Game Boy Advance, you can play them all via the Game Boy Player. Oh, this is it! The greatest thing ever invented. It's in my will. The Game Boy Player made virtually all Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games playable on GameCube. Just insert this on the bottom, pop this on the top, bam! You're using the Game Boy camera. It fundamentally adds roughly 10,000 games to the GameCube's library. This was actually the only thing I got with my GameCube when I was younger. On my birthday, I got this right alongside my Platinum GameCube. It was the only thing I could do with it for a while there, just play my Game Boy Advance games on the TV. Hey, I wasn't complaining. To have these games you could only ever play on a non-lit screen in the car on the same screen you watch Wings on, I learned to love that day. But this wasn't even something the GameCube needed to prove its worth. It was the cherry on top. Mario Sunshine may have been the only mainline Mario, but we got literally every type of spin-off imaginable. First up, Mario Kart Double Dash. Why, yes, I'm turned on. Such a damn good Mario Kart. The gimmick of 2 characters per kart is so fun and adds way more strategy to which character to pick. It used to be, I like Yoshi because, damn! Now each character has their own special item and you can mix that with other characters' special item by pairing them together. Each character is their own way, but mix that with another's, and there's so much more to consider now. Like, what will my mother think? God, I used to play battle mode so much with friends. It was my favorite part of the game. I tried to buy the game off of the friend who had it, and they would never budge. Sold me Mario Sunshine, though. The Mario sports titles were so plentiful. We got awesome renditions of Mario Golf and Mario Tennis, better than ever, just good solid arcadey multiplayer sports games. But we got 2 new series on the system, Mario Baseball and Mario Strikers. Mario Superstar Baseball was developed by Namco of all people and followed the footsteps of Mario Golf and Tennis. It was baseball with a Mario spin. It's a good solid time, but Super Mario Strikers is just a bit more interesting. It's the only other Mario sports game that actively asks me to suck it off. I have no idea how this got approved, but it was during a time in which you could tell Nintendo was squirming in their seats saying, "We have to start publishing M-rated games." I know it's sacrilegious to say, but while I appreciate Mario Strikers, I vastly prefer Mario Golf. Come on, that just looks funny. The sports titles weren't the only pieces of Mario multiplayer mayhem on the block. We got Mario Party 4, Mario Party 5, Mario Party 6, Mario Party 7. 2006 was known as the year without Mario Party. Mario Party became Nintendo's annual franchise for the GameCube, and you know what? I don't hear people complaining, because that was 15 years ago. So many reviewers hated these releases, saying how they were so lazy, the same thing over and over again. It's like, you guys gave Madden a 9.5. It's like, oh, the Nintendo 64 games were better. Like, have you played the GameCube ones? They're so good, and each of them are way more distinct than you may remember. For a yearly series, I think the differences between each Mario Party on GameCube is damn impressive. Hell, they introduced the GameCube microphone for 6 and 7, 6 being the best one. There's a whole day and night mechanic, but each of them is good in its own right. I don't think they had to really do a new one every single year, but hey, it made it so then no matter what was releasing on GameCube that holiday season, you could rest easy knowing if all else fails, you could always succumb to buying the Mario Party for that year. They legitimately did a lot more with each release than people give them credit for. I think the GameCube era is the best Mario Party's ever been. Okay, Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix, the absolute worst Mario Party's ever been. Another one of Nintendo's collaborations, this time with Konami. You know, it's pretty strange to me that out of all franchises Konami had, Dance Dance Revolution never really hit the Nintendo consoles all too much. Like, come on, this is Nintendo fans' bread and butter. They like arrows and dumb shit. It's even stranger, Nintendo basically had to give them Mario to make a DDR game happen on the console. This was the only DDR on GameCube, which is like accessories. That's a Nintendo fan's wet dream. Well, at least this one came over, and it's Dance Dance Revolution with a Mario skin. Yeah, I think this might show how dire third-party support was at the time. Nintendo couldn't even get a Dance Dance Revolution game, a series that was pumping out like a dozen entries a year in arcades and on consoles without lending their characters. Maybe it was because the GameCube's disc size being not optimal for all those songs, but for fuck's sake, the Game Boy Color got DDR. You know, this was a harder game to nab for a while there. It got discontinued fairly quickly, so yeah, DDR version 46 on the PlayStation 2 is fine. The one GameCube version that was exclusive, get rid of it. Most of the Mario spin-offs are pretty frantic like this, but for the mellow players out there, you had Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. A follow-up to the N64 game, Thousand-Year Door just expanded upon everything, a bigger, more epic and grossing RPG adventure. They didn't need any gimmicks or massive alterations to the gameplay. They took the original game and just made it better. Just a really solid, easy RPG for people who don't like RPGs. And I'm done talking about that. What do you know about Wario World? Wario's first home console platformer. He had Wario Land on the handhelds, but this was Wario World, bitch. It was developed by Treasure, one of those developer choices you think was just made because of their name. Like, I love Treasure. They've done Gunstar Heroes, Ikaruga, Sin and Punishment. Why give them Mario? Oh, because he likes gold. It's a pretty standard platformer, nothing all too special, but I appreciate the fact that they tried to do a 3D Wario game. I feel something like this just wouldn't have been made today. They were trying all kinds of new things. It was an exciting time for every series. Except for WarioWare. WarioWare Mega Party Games. I love the WarioWare series, but this game is just unimpressive. It takes the micro games from the original WarioWare on Game Boy Advance and just puts them on a GameCube. They don't look any different. In fact, they just straight up don't look good. They do not hide the fact this is just a Game Boy Advance game at its core. You don't get the single player story mode or the extra side games from that one. Instead, they focus on multiplayer here. There are a ton of really fun multiplayer modes focused on playing the micro games. It can be an absolute blast. Though I do wish there was a bit more to this one. That's something I find myself saying about every WarioWare game. I love them, but they always feel like there should be more content, especially with this one. I mean, great multiplayer modes, but I want more, especially considering all the microgames are recycled from the GBA. It surprises me how well this game reviewed at the time, while Mario Party always got crucified for using the same dice in every game. Well, if Wario got 2 games, Donkey Kong better get like 3 bongo rhythm games. Oh, thank Christ. So Donkey Kong was in a weird place this generation. Basically, it was just a bunch of weird spin-offs for a while. And add Donkey Konga to the list. Donkey Konga used the DK Bongos, an accessory for the GameCube based on just Donkey Kong that works with 4 games. One less less than the GameCube microphone. Accessories that were so much less specific got so much less support. Donkey Konga was a rhythm game. Pretty simple, clap and beat the bongos. They're all fun enough. 1 and 2 came out here, while 3 was exclusive to Japan for whatever reason. Were they scared? Konga was a fun little spin-off series, but Donkey Kong Jungle Beat is a bit more interesting, being a platformer that uses the bongos. I don't think anybody at Nintendo actively thought it was a good idea to use the bongos for a platformer. I think they just wanted to see if they could do it. They did. Jungle Beat is an insanely polished DK game. The first Nintendo made themselves in-house in over a decade. It was made by the team that would go on to make Super Mario Galaxy, and you can tell so hard. So many little elements that would go on to appear in that game got their start here. It's so cool. It's not a practical game, but a really cool one, though that does make me yearn for something simpler. How about Pokemon Channel? This is it. Pokemon Channel is a simulation game, pretty much a successor to Hey You Pikachu, but with even less content. You can watch Pokemon TV shows with Pikachu, play little mini games here and there. I am so glad I went with this and not the transfusion. There's also Pokemon Box, only available online and through the Pokemon Center store. It was just a game that would let you connect your Pokemon GBA games and organize your Pokemon. Again, glad I went with this instead. But there were legitimate Pokemon games released. Weirdly enough, full-blown RPGs. People clamored for a traditional Pokemon game on home consoles for decades, and the GameCube kind of gave us that to some extent. Pokemon Coliseum was basically a successor to the Pokemon Stadium games on Nintendo 64, but this one included a story mode. It's an actual Pokemon game on a home console, kinda sorta. Having somebody who couldn't give two left pisses about Pokemon try to explain how Pokemon Coliseum is an RPG but not like the main Pokemon games is like trying to watch him explain why you shouldn't be executed. So, while the mainline Pokemon games are about collecting all the Pokemon you can to help you battle your way to being the best Pokemon trainer out there through RPG mechanics, a game like Pokemon Coliseum is more so just an RPG adventure in the Pokemon universe. There's only like 50 Pokemon in the whole story and no Pokedex, so it's obvious the collecting aspect is de-emphasized in favor of just being a single-player RPG story mode in addition to the battling portion from the Stadium series. How'd I do? However, it's still an RPG Pokemon adventure on consoles. It may be a spin-off, but it's closer to a mainline game than it's not. I think it did a decent job giving a 3D Pokemon adventure on a home console. They even followed it up with Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. I think they were definitely trying to make this look more like the Game Boy Advance games rather than a Pokemon Stadium type game. The title and especially the box art really feel more so like the mainline games. For most of Nintendo's home consoles, Pokemon releases were always just spin-offs. Prime example, the Pokemon Company always considered the franchise to work best in handheld form, while home consoles being more fit for other experiences. But Pokemon Coliseum and XD Gale of Darkness showed they were definitely being pushed as much as they could have to give the GameCube a more traditional Pokemon experience, even if they didn't completely meet all the requirements. And if Pokemon games couldn't save the GameCube, I'm sure they said, fine, we have nothing to lose. Battalion Wars. This was a different take on the Advance Wars series, more action-oriented compared to turn-based strategy. I've always found Battalion Wars to be a weird series of Nintendo, so it's a home console version of Advance Wars that really has practically nothing to do with Advance Wars. It's odd they did this because Fire Emblem, the series by the same developer as Advance Wars Intelligent Systems, had a very traditional entry on the GameCube. Path of Radiance. The first Fire Emblem on a home console to release outside of Japan, that was a big deal. I think. I mean, what, did you expect me to have anything to say about Fire Emblem Path of Radiance? It's Fire Emblem, I'm a fucking idiot. Do the math. I think it's great that they were consistently bringing out the Fire Emblem titles to the West, though. The Path of Radiance feels so epic and looks great even today. Now, it's wild to see the CGI cutscenes look so on par without cutscenes looking more modern Fire Emblem games. Path of Radiance was definitely a darker game compared to Nintendo's other outings, but it was still a Nintendo game at the end of the day. The one game took what it meant to be a Nintendo game somewhere it's never been. Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, the first M-rated Nintendo published title. A survival horror game unlike any other. Even to this day, just walking around the opening where nothing of note happens is creepy as all hell. Just that ominous sound in the background. The game actively fucks with you at every turn, playing tricks on the player themselves to scare them, not the characters in the game. That's what's brilliant about this title and what makes it so special. It's one of the most truly scary survival horror games ever made. I personally think this holds up better than the first few Resident Evils. It's easy to understand why it didn't do the greatest sales-wise. I mean, why would you want a game that lies and tells you your save data has been corrupted? You're going out of your way to create problems for yourself. And then we have Geist, Nintendo's other M-rated game on the GameCube. And that's all it'll ever be. Yeah, this one didn't leave the same impact that Eternal Darkness did. It's okay, the concept behind Geist is wicked cool. It's about ghosts! Both of these games didn't light sales charts on fire, but at least Pikmin did well enough to net a sequel, Pikmin 2! Pikmin 2 is such a cool mess. It's quite a bit different structurally from the first, but that makes it more interesting. I like that they went in a new direction. They could have easily made Pikmin 2 more of the same, but there's legitimate reasons to play both titles. They took more risks on this console. For example, they brought over loads of games from series that were originally never localized. Animal Crossing launched on the Nintendo 64 in Japan only, but that exact version with some updates came on over to the GameCube worldwide. It was all about just being alive. Not interested. Collect items, upgrade your house. It took the small elements of life normally seen as mundane yet are satisfying at their core and made a gaming experience about them. I don't think anybody would have expected this game to become one of Nintendo's largest franchises, especially considering the limitations of the consoles that originally released on. It's hard to imagine Animal Crossing without online support in some way. To visit your friend's town in this entry, you basically had to plug in their memory card. Out of all games to not use this damn accessory. However, Animal Crossing did support the e-reader, an accessory for the Game Boy Advance that Nintendo somehow thought would work well as a GameCube accessory. So you have to plug the e-reader into the Game Boy Advance, plug that into the GameCube, and scan a card for said GameCube game to unlock certain content. At one point or another, isn't plugging the Game Boy Advance in enough? More GameCube games than you think supported the peripheral. Pikmin 2 in Japan, Pokemon Coliseum in Japan, Pokemon Channel. Hey, 4 is more than I'd think. Which, this just makes me wonder why they didn't just have the e-reader as a standalone unit you could plug into the Game Boy Advance or the GameCube. Instead, you always had to plug it into a Game Boy Advance. And for GBA games that supported it, you had to plug the e-reader into a separate Game Boy Advance, then connect that Game Boy Advance to your Game Boy Advance. Nintendo in 2005. Nobody gets me! If you want to talk about strange GameCube moments, how about this? The Japanese exclusive GameCube model made by Panasonic, the Panasonic Q. This is a GameCube with a DVD player built in, but it's not like DVD functionality was programmed into the GameCube. You swap between DVD player mode and GameCube mode. By all extents and purposes, it's a DVD player and GameCube duct taped together. It's a gorgeous device, and even though it was obscenely expensive in Japan, I think for the right price, it could have significantly helped GameCube sales over here. The PS2 and Xbox truly had the advantage with DVD playback, especially the PS2. So while this wouldn't have made Sony piss their pants, I think they would have head to the bathroom just in case. Well, it works better as closet fodder for me. But then we have Chibi Robo, my darling, my checklist of sins. This is a game I think of when GameCube is brought up. Something different and weird, but good in its own right. It's so charming and bizarre, controlling a little robot in a big house aiming to make the residents happier. This was the generation where they were willing to do weird shit. Exactly! Use the microphone from Mario Party 6 to control pinball in this feudal Japan wartime pinball game, made by the creators of Seaman and Ute Tower. Custom Robo! Only Nintendo would have 2 games released for the same console released within 2 years of each other about robots, both with the name C-Robo. Much like Animal Crossing, this series originally released on Nintendo 64 and finally made its way over here on the GameCube. I kinda wish the game was dumber, and I'm not trying to be weird about this, just the game's about customizing your robot and then battling with it, and I just feel like both customizing and battling aren't as fun as they could be to me. I wish it was a bit more of a party fighting game than the action RPG that it is, but hey, still a solid game, just not really my thing. Buying Kaitos and Buying Kaitos Origins by Monolith Soft, who went on to develop the Xenoblade series. Card battling RPGs, first one published by Namco, second by Nintendo. Cubivore, Gotcha Force, there's so many forgotten games on the GameCube, and we're still not done with the major releases. Kirby Air Ride, the only Kirby game on the platform. There was a platform in development that eventually became Return to Dreamland on Wii years later, but Air Ride was a different take on racing. Let's make a racing game where you only use one button. Yeah, let's also make a Donkey Kong where you look like a 1080 Avalanche, sequel to 1080 snowboarding on the 64. Pretty much the Wave Race Blue Storm of that series. God, Nintendo put a ton of effort into their non-Mario Kart racers, especially F-Zero GX. Have you met God? No, but you got
damn close. You thought Sega making GameCube games was weird? How about booting up F-Zero GX and seeing that Sega logo right at the start, next to the Nintendo one no less? Yeah, this was a collaborative effort. Amusement Vision, the Sega studio responsible for Monkey Ball, developed this, and it's easy to see why there wasn't a home console F-Zero after this for decades, because how the hell do you top this? Never before have I played a racing game that puts you in a trance like GX does. The visuals and smoothness are unmatched with all the colors and especially the track design. I just get sucked in while playing. Sometimes when I see a road above me, I flinch, like it almost feels like you're really there playing the game. It's amazing. It's brutally difficult, but GX is an amazing racer and the peak of the F-Zero franchise. This is about as good as it gets. I am sorry, Star Fox fans. Star Fox Adventures was the first Star Fox released on the GameCube. Who were they fooling here? It's not Star Fox. It used to be a game called Dinosaur Planet, but was changed later on to include the Star Fox crew. It's not a bad game, not by a long shot. It takes the universe of Star Fox and turns it into more of a Zelda game, an on-foot adventure with puzzles and combat. This was developed by Rare, who supplied the Nintendo 64 with half its library, and they were positioned to be an excellent ally to have throughout the GameCube generation. And a day after Adventures released, they were bought by Microsoft. You know, Adventures got a ton of slack back in the day, but the thing is, it's quite good. It's just not Star Fox. I'd say give this game a chance if you can today, and if you're in the mood for a real man Star Fox, a few years later, Nintendo supplied you with exactly that. Not Nintendo specifically. Star Fox started to truly struggle this generation. Nintendo gave up on making the games themselves and started to outsource them. Rare developed Adventures and Namco developed Star Fox Assault. Another fine game, much more in line with what you'd expect out of the franchise, though expanding to on-foot missions in addition to the on-rail space shooting definitely shows how they felt the need to radically expand the gameplay of Star Fox. The original and SNES and Star Fox 64 were short games. You just keep replaying them to find new paths and nab a high score, and that type of game was starting to become less and less in demand. And that's kind of the story of Nintendo this generation. They struggled regardless of how amazing the GameCube's lineup was. And while this was a hard pill for me to swallow as a kid, and even now I see all these amazing games, and Nintendo gave us pretty much every franchise we wanted. And it's hard to comprehend how this was one of Nintendo's lowest selling systems. It becomes easier and easier to see why as time progresses. I love this system. It will always be my favorite of all time. But if somebody told me they weren't huge into it, I'd understand. Much like any other stupid fucking opinion they'd have, but still, I get it. I think the GameCube had some of the most consistent yet creative output from Nintendo, while others may see it as too experimental or, oddly enough, too safe. Games were either just more of the same from the Nintendo 64, or some games strayed too far, not being what fans wanted from that franchise. I mean, Star Fox got both of that here. Looking back at this whole generation, I think it's clear as day. GameCube owners were very satisfied with their console. But for those who didn't own one, there just wasn't that major hook. There were tons of games to play and enjoy here, but you could say that about every console out at the time. That wasn't special. So it makes sense why the PlayStation 2 dominated and the GameCube sold as little as it did. But I feel that the more limited library and lacking the ability to do anything but play games creates a more passionate connection to the console. You didn't buy this because it made the most practical sense. You bought this to play Mario Party 5, damn it. I feel that everybody who owned a GameCube can agree on and bond over how cool and fun the games were and still are. How much it stood apart from the competition in terms of its library and design. It was pretty much a standard game console but with a Nintendo twist, which is what a lot of people wanted from the Wii generation when the company leaned too heavily into the casual market. Why can't Nintendo just make a standard game console to compete with the Xbox and PlayStation? Well, they did, and you didn't buy it, but I did, and I'd do it again. 4 more times, and when it comes to choosing between DVD playback and it had to be done.